Well, good evening. Hi, I'm Michael Pisani. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development, and I'd like to welcome you to this Emerging Technologies Symposium. This is the fourth in a series of symposiums UCR is having as part of its capital campaign, Living the Promise. This program is intended to highlight the emerging technologies, the faculty at UCR, and the students that they work with. The Living the Promise, the campaign for UCR, is a comprehensive campaign in which our goal is to raise over $300 million to support the university, support programs like student success, faculty research, and expanding our research facilities as well. And it's a very important program for the university. I'll tell you, as Vice Chancellor for Research, I have some small seed funds that I use to invest in faculty. What I do is I give our bright and successful faculty a little bit of money, and they actually become more successful, make a greater impact. I believe as I look around at the faculty speaking today, I've given money to all but Kelly. And Kelly, you could talk to me afterwards, and we can chat a little bit and see if that works. But for those in the audience, I actually want you to chat with Kelly and with Sue and Julia and Vasilis and Wayne and David and Charlie about their research as well and the students that they're working with to see if you can find ways to support them. This symposium is based on 6 themes: social innovation and empowerment, health and wellness. This is the emerging technologies, and we're going to have 3 more on from genomics to harvest, renewable nature, and new voices and visions. And it's really designed to highlight all of the interdisciplinary work that happens at this university. This current round of symposium will end in May, but next school year, will start up as well. And for the students here, it's an opportunity for you to mingle, to meet with the faculty, to see what's happening. And I'm also happy that there's a poster session afterwards. Some of the things that you'll actually see is how we take the technologies developed at the university and turn them into commercial products in a center we called EPIC. So with no further ado, let me introduce my friend and colleague, David Casalis. He's a professor of chemical and environmental engineering. He's also the Winston Chung Professor of Energy Innovation, showing the importance of endowed chairs at the university. And of course, he's a member of the Marion and Rosemary Bournes College of Engineering, which wouldn't have been founded without the support of some of our community members. David is a Kavli Fellow of the National Academy of Sciences. He also is the principal investigator of a large multidisciplinary grant funded by the Department of Defense on bio-inspired materials. And David is also the co-founder of a company that's involved with nature-inspired materials. So David is going to be our MC and host for the evening. So David, come on up.
Good evening, everybody. Yes, that's good. Hopefully you've had your coffee this time of the evening. Thank you very much, Mike, for the kind introduction, and Ian Foster, who helped to organize this program. Ian, thank you very much. Okay, so let's get started right away, if you don't mind. First of all, in this event, as Mike had just said, we want to highlight some of the excellent work that's been done here at UCR by our faculty and our students. And really what we want to do is show you how we're translating some of this technology to our communities, to our nation, and to the world. But this topic today is on emerging technologies. And so some of the issues in our industrialized world over the past 2.5 centuries or so is that we've had heavy use of fossil fuels. We've had a huge population surge. To give you an example, in 1800, the world's population was about 1 billion people. By 1900, it was 1.6 billion, and by the year 2000, it was 6 billion people. And now we're currently at 7.5 billion people. And with that said, that's putting a huge strain on our planet, leading to serious environmental issues, which you'll hear some today, including stressing the air we breathe, the water that we drink, and the food that we eat. And so, as you know, I see a lot of students in here, which is great. There are students and faculty that are working really hard to solve these issues, really critical issues. And I've been fortunate to be at UCR for almost 10 years now, and had the opportunity to see the university grow, and fortunate to work with actually faculty based on Mike, the Vice Chancellor Pisani's comment about his seed grants. I've worked with biologists, ecologists, earth scientists, and I'm in chemical and environmental engineering and material science, so it's really quite a diverse coupling, and we do a lot of cross-cutting research. So I've seen the campus grow, and I guess also in the 10 years, my eyesight has also gone, so I need this for a minute, so I'll put these on. So we have 6 faculty members from UCR who will be speakers and panelists. And each of these members were selected based on their expertise in the different areas of research that will be presented today. And they'll also come up on stage after their talks, and we'll have a panel discussion where they'll highlight not just what they do, but also what others at UCR are doing in terms of emerging technologies. And so what we really want to hear from these speakers is to hear about these alternate sources of energy. We want to hear about environmental strategies to monitor and clean our air and water. We want to talk about ways to make food more abundant, even in the face of drought. And we also want to come up with strategies that reduce our impact and carbon footprint via new transportation technologies. And then, of course, along with this comes with the challenge of how to deal with the ever-increasing amount of data that's being transmitted and stored and processed, and we'll have a speaker on that as well. But most important, well, equally important, I should say, is with our ever-changing world, how do we actually make sure that our youth is educated on these technologies to adapt and actually influence future emerging technologies so that one of you will be up here, I don't know how old you are, maybe in 20 years or so, giving talks like this. And so we want to engage with you today, students, faculty, guests of the university, to be interactive with us in our panel discussion. So ask questions. And of course, there's always a temptation to discuss political issues in light of this highly charged atmosphere that we live in today, but hopefully we can keep things calm and collected and focus on the excellent technologies that are coming out of UCR. And I wore a purple tie today to show my neutrality, not red, not blue. Now, finally, after the panel session, we really want to invite you, as Vice Chancellor Pisani said, to our poster session, which is on the other side of those drapes, where we'll have students really show you some of the details of what they're doing in these excellent emerging technologies. So with that, I want to invite our first speaker, Professor Charles Wyman. Charles is in the Department of Chemical and Environmental Engineering, as well as over at the Center for Environmental Research and Technology. He is the Ford Motor Company Chair in environmental engineering. He's a distinguished professor in chemical and environmental engineering. His work, his research focuses, I'm not going to take too much of his time, on cellulosic biomass with sustainable production of transportation fuels via biological and catalytic conversion. But a lot of our faculty actually go beyond and translate their research into industry. So Charlie also is the president and CEO of Vertimass LLC, a startup company, and maybe he might mention that, I don't know. But he also has, his past was, he was the center director, division director, branch manager, program manager, and senior engineer at NREL out in Colorado. There's a lot more I could talk about for Charlie over hours, but with that, let's introduce Charlie.
Okay, well, thank you, David, for the introduction and the opportunity to be here, and thank you all for coming. Glad to have this opportunity to talk a little bit about alternative energy. And so what I wanted to do is start out, maybe give a little bit of background of why alternative energy is important. And just this slide is one example. It just shows the historic drivers in terms of why we've looked at alternative energy, because traditionally, or over the years, we've really become very dependent on fossil sources, whether it's oil, natural gas, coal. But a series of disruptions in the past have sort of pushed people at least consider, during those disruptions at least, these alternative sources of energy. And just these red lines show over time various crises, if you will, that have come up and driven interest in energy. For example, in around 1973, that was the time period in which OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, recognized that the United States oil production was declining, and so they sort of put on the squeeze on oil availability, and that drove up prices. And as you can see in that first blip, that became much higher. And then we have these periods where the prices drop and the interest goes down in alternative energy. But at least in some sense, this just shows and it's sort of an eye chart, so I apologize for that. But what I wanted to do is point out particularly that bottom line, or next to the bottom line, which is last year's energy use. And it just shows how the energy mix varies across coal, natural gas, petroleum, and then on the right, we can see the various renewable energy forms that I highlight here in the green, things like geothermal, solar, wind, and biomass. And what's happened over that time is that now we have about 10%, almost 10% of our energy comes from these alternative energy sources, primarily renewable or sustainable energy. But another important driver now, right now oil prices are low, so everybody's willing to forget about the fact we need low alternative energy because there's plenty of low-cost oil at $40 a barrel or whatever. But there's another driver that's really important that some people think is a driver, some like to ignore it, but basically it's greenhouse gas emissions and the fact that fossil sources release a lot of carbon dioxide, and this just shows the historic increase in CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere and how it's gone up from around 300 parts per million around 1950s or so up to around 400 plus parts per million now. And of course the concern there is that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that traps infrared radiation and causes the planet to warm. So one of the options to address this is sustainable energy sources. And on the left, I picture here sustainable energy sources of sunlight, wind, hydro, geothermal, nuclear, and minerals. And on the right, human needs, things like food, energy, et cetera. But in this particular talk, we're really focusing on the human needs and particularly energy. So I'd like to mainly look at it from the viewpoint of how do we drive energy for motors, for lights, for heat, for transport. And again, if we look over on the left side and look at the various options we have, so it's really a matter of connecting the dots between the two. And so a friend of mine, Lee Lind at Dartmouth College, came up with a sort of intermediates, these two primary intermediates, as he calls them, biomass and electricity. And basically from sunlight, wind, hydro, geothermal, and nuclear, we can generate electricity. And so from that electricity, we can then use it for a variety of applications. But in addition to that, sunlight will produce biomass. And actually, one of my original, when I first joined the National Renewable Energy Laboratory way back in more years ago than I'd care to admit, at that point I was really working on energy storage. And after looking at a series of energy storage technologies and economics, I decided during that time frame to transition over to biomass because I felt biomass was a really beautiful solar collector and energy storage device. And so, but anyway, and then once we have those primary intermediates, we can go to secondary intermediates, organic fuels, hydrogen, batteries, to use in these various end uses. But in my particular case, our focus in my particular team is really on biomass conversion to fuels and chemicals. And it just shows here, and the thing about biomass is it's very unique in the ability to make sustainable liquid fuels. We really don't have any other viable option for large-scale, low-cost production of liquid fuels. And so what are we trying to do? And by the way, I should mention there's many other aspects of these alternative energies or sustainable energy technologies, research being done here at UCR. I'm just focusing on what I know best, which is biofuels part of it, but there's a lot more to it than that. But anyway, what we're trying to do in my particular group is to convert cellulosic biomass, things like corn stover, the materials left after they harvest corn, switchgrass, and fast-growing grass that we can use as an energy crop, or woody crops that are fast-growing, convert those into liquid fuels. So the challenge we face is how do you put low-cost biomass in your car? Well, here's one way, but it doesn't get very good transport. So we need to look for other options. And so the trick is how do we convert the solid material biomass? We don't like solid fuels in general. We prefer liquid fuels. And so how do we convert this solid material, this resource, into a liquid fuel? So first of all, we look at what is cellulosic biomass. Well, cellulosic biomass is it's nature's composite material. It's comprised of cellulose, about 50% roughly of the plant is cellulose, and that's true of trees, grasses, or so forth. And that's composed of glucose sugars. It's a long chain of glucose sugars make up cellulose. Another roughly 25% of biomass, or cellulosic biomass, is called hemicellulose. That is also made up of a lot of different sugars, but it's more heterogeneous. But one of them that typically predominates is a sugar called xylose. The third part is lignin, and lignin is not you can't break that down into sugars like you can the cellulose and hemicellulose, but it's very similar to coal, and so a friend of mine used to call it young coal. But basically, in plants, we have this long chains of cellulose, and they're glued together by the hemicellulose and lignin. That is the binder that makes this all work. And so the thing we can do is if we can break down these long chains of cellulose and hemicellulose into the sugars that make up those two, we can then ferment those sugars to ethanol as a product for fuel. And that's what this shows here. And again, I'm sort of rushing through this in the interest of time, but I at least want to give you some idea of what we're doing. So we start with the cellulosic biomass in green, and then we go within this dotted line, which represents the boundaries of a process, go through a pretreatment step, and that is basically to overcome nature's resistance to breakdown. If nature did not resist breaking down into sugars, we would have no plants, because organisms would devour them. So we have to overcome that natural resistance through pretreatment. Then we go through a series of biological operations of enzymatic hydrolysis and fermentation to make ethanol. The ethanol we can then recover, and then we use the solids that are left, burn those to provide all the heat and electricity for the process. Well, one of the things that we've recently done at UCR, one of my students who's worked with me, has come up with a novel way to pretreat biomass. One of the challenges in pretreatment has been the cost of the pretreatment itself, but also the amount of enzymes required to break down the biomass afterwards. And we've come up with this novel way where we use THF, tetrahydrofuran, in a pretreatment process that dramatically increases the susceptibility of the biomass to breakdown. And then we're fortunate to be funded by something called a Bioenergy Science Center, which is a large $25 million a year center led by Oak Ridge National Laboratories and funded by the Department of Energy, as shown, Oak Ridge being circled in green, but UCR is a key part of this overall team. And basically, we focus on working with about 300 different people spread in 18 institutions across the country to develop technologies for improving the breakdown of cellulosic biomass to sugars for fermentation. And so part of it, just is a pretty quick slide, but one of the things we've been able to do because of this new self process and through this BESC support is to show that we can convert biomass to sugars with extremely low enzyme loadings. And that's important because traditionally the kind of amount of enzymes used would cost about $1 a gallon of final fuel just for the enzymes. That's way too expensive, and we've driven it down to maybe 5 or 10 cents. But the problem is now, even though we get nearly complete conversion, it almost takes a month, and that's a little bit too long. But recently, another one of my students has combined the use of an organism called Clostridium thermocellum, which is an unusual organism, and it produces its own enzymes and then ferments the sugars it releases to final products. In combination with this self-pretreatment that we've invented here at UCR, we can then show in this bottom set of lines that we can pre-treat materials and get both corn stover and poplar wood very fast conversion to sugars or breakdown in only 2 days. So that's really a big change in terms of the playing field for this technology. The last thing, and I'm just going to wrap up now, is that in terms of, there's a lot of emphasis on jobs lately, and one of the things recently ran into this article about renewable energy jobs in thousands. And the U.S. now has about 800,000 jobs in the renewable energy sector, so it's very substantial. And even though that's big, the world has 8 million. So we have to think about how do we increase that number of jobs in the United States relative to the rest of the world. And so with that, I will stop. I don't think we have questions now. That'll be later. So thank you very much.
Okay, so hopefully everyone is taking notes because the quiz is held between 7:15 p.m. to 7:25. So, okay. So again, if you have questions, we're going to hold them until our panel discussion, but we would like you to interact if possible. Our next speaker is an assistant professor. I think I can safely say she's the youngest member of our panel today. Dr. Kelly Barsanti is a faculty member in the Chemical and Environmental Engineering Department, as well as at the CSERT Center off campus. And her research focuses on development of mechanistic models for the prediction of atmospheric particulate matter. And if you've been to Beijing, like I have recently, you'll know what that means. Dr. Barsanti's research involves improving speciation of organic compounds in emission inventories for biomass burning and other combustible sources. She has her PhD in environmental science and engineering, and she served as the Advanced Study Program Postdoc Fellow at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. So Kelly, if you don't mind, please.
So thank you to the organizers for inviting me to participate in the symposium, and for all of you for being here. To my students, thank you for being here, and don't forget to sign in. Okay, the atmosphere, the biosphere, and the hydrosphere. So we, as citizens of planet Earth, we recognize these spaces as our environment. We also recognize that we don't exist independently of our environment, and our environment doesn't exist independently of us. So it's been argued recently that we've entered a new era, the Anthropocene, in which human-driven changes to our environment are both rapid and expansive. As scientists and engineers, we acknowledge that some of these changes have dramatic and devastating impacts on our social, physical, and economic well-being. They present some of our greatest environmental challenges. And so as engineers, we accept these challenges and we turn them into opportunities. So here at UCR, we are part really of a global network of scientists and engineers. Together we collect data, we develop tools, we create technologies that ultimately will deliver the solutions to these environmental problems. Okay, this is a picture of some of the chemical and environmental engineering, and also some of the CSERT faculty that focus their research on environmental problems. Primarily here at UCR, we focus on air and water. Those are the spheres of our research. There are 4 faculty in chemical and environmental engineering that are assistant professors, and so in the next several slides, I'll talk more about their research. Okay, so tonight's theme is emerging technologies, and as this global network and here at UCR, we are both the developers and users of emerging technologies. Some of those I've highlighted here. Number one, they're enabling us to lower the cost and improve the portability of both sensors and systems. In addition, this morning I was driving in my car and I thought, you know, what do you say? We're able to develop almost any kind of material that you can imagine. And so the word Imagineering came to my head, so I thought it was appropriate that we're in California and the word Imagineering is often associated with Disney. Turns out that Disney did not coin that term, however, and it does in fact represent this idea that you can build anything you can think of. So we are really Imagineering new materials for their performance and for their sustainability. So 2 of my colleagues will be, I'll be presenting some of their research on developing electrically conducting membranes, and another colleague's research on biomimetic heterogeneous catalysts. In addition, we're expanding the computational grid. So what does that mean? This is probably, unlike maybe low-cost sensors and engineering or Imagineering materials, what does it mean to expand the computational grid? So this is a long quote. So here, it's a long quote here, but the idea is that this word grid is used in parallel to describe something that's somewhat like a power grid. So I'll read starting in the middle here that says, "We believe that by providing pervasive, dependable, consistent, and inexpensive access to advanced computational capabilities, databases, sensors, and people, computational grids will have a similar transforming effect, allowing new classes of applications to emerge." So we are indeed building and using these computational grids. In addition, we're making the most of big data. So what happens when we lower the cost of sensors? They proliferate. Sensors are everywhere. We have gathered more data than we can possibly know what to do with. In addition, these high computing capabilities expanding this computational grid also enable us to run more simulations. We have more model predictions also than we know what to do with. So making the most of big data, a little bit here, these new technologies are emerging to organize and make sense of this avalanche of data. So we can now identify patterns and regularities in data that allow us to advance scholarship, improve the human condition, and create commercial and social value. Okay, so here I have 4 slides. Again, just one slide for each of our research, the assistant professors in the department. They all employ or are working to develop the technologies that I mentioned. So Haizhou Liu, he's working on developing cost-effective and efficient ultraviolet-based water technologies. So these are efficient, they're sustainable. He's using them to help develop infrastructure for industry. And ultimately, right, the goal is water sustainability and protection of public health. So I won't go into detail here, but the idea is this here is the portable sensor that's used as a water treatment source. Important to show the people, Haizhou's actually one of the only ones that actually sent a picture of his group, right? And this is about training the next generation. So all of the data that we're presenting, all the things we're presenting, wouldn't be possible without our students. And so thank you to Haizhou for highlighting their contributions. So moving into the sort of Imagineering part, we have these electrically conducting membranes, and these on these surfaces, these membranes, these electrochemical reactions are a powerful anti-fouling tool. They're very energy efficient. You get energy delivery right where you need it and when. But the challenge in these is really developing a material that combines the conductivity with selective transport. So they've developed in Dr. Jaspie's labs a carbon nanotube polymer composite that does just what they're looking for. And here's some pictures of the anti-fouling effects and the nanotube and the composite. Okay, so also along the lines of Imagineering, developing these reduction mechanisms for highly recalcitrant water contaminants. So this is a new faculty in the department, Dr. Liu as well. So here they're using these active catalysts. It's hydrogen, so it's very active and it's completely reusable. It works in highly saline waters. The byproducts of this UV disinfection, you end up with reduced sulfur species. So these are sort of these, they're innocuous, if you will. It's a ubiquitous water mineral. So the byproducts are not damaging to the environment. And this really has been shown to be the most efficient treatment method to date. So finally, one slide on my own research. So one of the things that we're doing, we're really relying on this computational grid and data science to unravel the complex chemistry that's associated with biomass burning plumes. So in these smoke samples, this is just a single source. You can only imagine what these look like when we're sampling from the field. We get thousands of compounds in a given source, and we're trying to track the chemistry of each individual compound and how those compounds form pollutants in the environment, which is important for providing better models for fire managers and the air quality management community. So I wanted to end with a clever quote, but I thought I'd just leave this slide instead, and thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Kelly. That was really nice. Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Wayne Miller. Let me just pull up my glasses here. There you go. Wayne is the manager of emissions and fuels for the Center for Environmental Research and Technology, and he joined the CSERT in December of 2000. Dr. Miller brings more than 25 years of experience in technology planning, chemical engineering processes, new product development and commercialization, business development, and multinational relationships out at CSERT. He earned his bachelor degree in chemical engineering from Worcester Polytech in Massachusetts and a PhD in chemical engineering from Caltech. Wayne?
Thank you for coming, and I appreciate the invite from David and the others that organized this. I know the title's supposed to be Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but we actually do work on ships, and ships move about 80 or 90% of the goods in the world today, in case you're not knowledgeable of that. Okay, we've heard two speakers, Dr. Wyman and Dr. Basanti, talk about CSERT, and then up here you can see next to UCR that it says that it's the College of Engineering Center for Environmental Research and Technology. We primarily, though, look at problems related to air. There's some metrics on it. The only one I'll focus on is the $15 million in contracts that are running through that in 8 minutes. I don't have time to cover 15 million, so you're going to get shortchanged today. Some of the projects I've been involved with, we have mobility issues, and they're not just the cars or bikes that take us here, but there's a lot of other sources that we don't really know a lot about. And this project was about 10 years ago. These problems are complex. Obviously, took a team to measure the emissions from a cooperative and collaborative, an unnamed airline. You might be able to guess who it is. But anyway, the main thing is that it took this team. We measured, this was the first emission measurements from a commercial airline. We did it on the ground. Locomotive research. If you look at the ports and looked at these locomotives when we did this work, also about 10 years ago, this was near the ports of Los Angeles. As you know, communities that are near the ports tend to be people that are poorer, and they tend to have a lot of environmental injustice issues, is what people say today. And these locomotives were being routinely used in that Wilmington and other area down there, made in 1950. We didn't know what the emissions were. We knew it had an impact, so that's what we did. They were affectionately known as the Smurfs, by the way, the blue locomotives. The other thing, we also did a project with Caltech. You can see a large container ship. It's moving about 9,000 containers. It's a world-class container ship. It's sailing in the Pacific Ocean. The UCR student was on board making the measurements, and the Caltech student was in the plane here. Following, you can see the plume here. You know, everything we planned went wrong, but everything turned out great. I mean, that's the way research is. The plane was there because they were studying clouds, but there wasn't a cloud to be seen. Anyway, so that was some work looking at the emissions we measured from 4 seconds to 4,000 second lifetime of the emissions. Since we're in Riverside and we know ships are near the port, and you might wonder, you know, everyone complains about the big plumes of soot and smoke that's coming out. How much of it reaches Riverside? Well, this was the work that another student did with the Air Quality Management District. He took data for 2 years, measured it over these particular sites here. They're EPA fixed sites, so they're actually always measuring the emissions, and his work was to actually figure out a tracer and then statistically and mathematically relate the information to how far inland this soot went. About 1% for Riverside. This real-time emissions for a San Francisco ferry. We worked with the blue and white excursion ferry up there. And the one thing is when the ferry is going towards the Golden Gate Bridge and makes the turn, you can see down here, you know, from her work that the nature of the emissions, both this is physical nature, but also it turns out the chemical nature of the emissions changed dramatically, and that's important if you're looking at health studies. All the projects I've showed you so far, there weren't data. One thing that UCR built about 10 years ago was a unique mobile emission lab. Usually these labs here are on cement. And this was the former director. Imagineering, we heard Dr. Basanti, so he was always Imagineering, I would say. And when he told people he was going to put this, you know, this federally certified lab on wheels, they told him he was crazy. They're always built on cement. Mitch Boretz remembers that. And anyway, it turned out to work, so we were able to make measurements in congestive traffic and show in this particular work that the emissions going in this direction up to the 60 freeway, the toxic emissions were 10 times those coming in the other direction, covering the 60 freeway back to the port. So it gave us a lot of opportunities to look at new things. Okay, the future. But no one came in a truck or a plane or a locomotive, I don't think, here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about automobiles. And in the future, we hear very commonly AI is everything, right? I mean, we're using it in everything we see today. If you're in that area of engineering, there's a strong outlook. So I'm going to talk about the passenger car in particular. Harmonious mobility network, that's what Toyota down here refers to. They talk about society with great freedom, a green society. They talk about revolutionary, changing how the communities and land use is going to be. And I've been involved in transportation since the 70s. And the main thing I can tell you is that what you're going to see in the next generation is actually revolutionary in terms of your personal transport. I mean, we've been inching along, making small changes, but it's going to change dramatically. And their view of the future was shared electric vehicles that went around a city or a community. It would be at a pad here. You would reserve it on your app, of course, and you'd go there. The vehicle would be ready. You'd get in it. You'd drive to the next one. You'd leave it and move on. However, did you know that UCR and Honda had an IntelliShare program that did exactly that between 1996 and 2006? The program was discontinued, and now what we have at UCR is a Sustainable Integrated Grid Initiative where vehicles like the bus that you see are cars, so we have solar power generating the fuel for these vehicles. They're connected to the grid, and so they, in time, and this is what will happen in time, the vehicles could either draw power from the grid or push power back in, and those are things that people are talking about today. Not being done yet, though. Okay. Intelligent mobility and seamless autonomous mobility. What's intelligent mobility? You have that today. I'll give you an example. How about your ABS braking? How about your speed control? So there's a lot of intelligent mobility already built into the vehicles that you have today. To now we see on TV collision avoidance. The lady's backing up and beep, beep, beep. Her car stops because there's a car coming. See, she didn't see it with the children, as you recall in the TV ad. Ford, Tesla, BMW, and others predict sales by 2001 of basically autonomous mobility. How much sales? Is going to be very expensive, maybe 1% is what they're forecasting. But in the off-road operation, I saw it in Cummins when I was there in the late 1990 timeframe. All the engines were moving around with robots. No one was driving them. So, and then today, if you go to the Long Beach terminal, you will actually see this is a robot. So actually, when the ships come in with 10,000, 13,000 containers, they're actually lifted by a robot. No one's operating them. They're lowered to this, and it drives off. When it's running out of power, it knows it's running out of power. It goes over and gets a new charge of batteries. This is being done today. And so the question is, when are you going to see this in the car that you drive? When it's on road, there's quite a few more safety issues. So one of the things that they're actually looking at, this is Dr. Barth's work at CSIRT, so he's looking at connecting these vehicles to signals, or it could be roundabouts or something like that. So there's a different type of communication that the vehicle is doing. Or in the DOE world, it gets even more complicated. And as you can imagine with all the, it's hard enough watching cars when you just have one vehicle. Can you imagine having a whole fleet of vehicles entering an intersection and how they're talking to each other and getting actually the optimal, being safe, better mobility, and lower environmental impact. So these are things that people are working on. Now, to be practical in the university, I mean, if you look at like an Apple or Google, we know that's working on this, they have bank accounts that range, in the $50 to $100 billion range. So when they put a team to work on this, they're putting a lot of effort, and there's jobs there for people who like coding in this area. But the main thing is that we tend to look at smaller projects. There's a slide that's missing. Okay, and the way that UCR is doing these projects down here, the National Center for Sustainable Transportation is actually a partnership between all of these universities. It's funded at some place in the order of, I think it's around $10 million for 5 years. And, but that's the only way. You can't do these problems working in a silo. You need to have teammates, just like you're learning in your classes here, so that you can work across these silos and then present practical solutions. One of the funding partners for UCR is the California Air Resources Board, and I end the talk showing that this is an important change. This is incredible that the California Air Resources Board has decided to relocate their El Monte facility to University of California. The governor in January of 2017 put in $413 million to make that facility come about. So that's a significant advantage for us, and obviously will present a lot of opportunities for discovery. And now for the Academy Awards, we have, of course, the students that do all of the work, and usually smiling, but not always. Anyways, thank you very much.
Right. So with that said, there's obviously both Dr. Barsanti and Dr. Miller mentioned vehicles and a lot of sensors and the need for basically processing a lot of data. And so that's a really good segue, because our next speaker works in this area. Dr. Vasilis Sotras, if I can pronounce that right, yeah, okay, is a professor in computer science and engineering here in our Bournes College of Engineering at UCR. His research includes databases, data mining, artificial intelligence, and in fact, he's co-authored a book on advanced database indexing. He got his bachelor's in electrical engineering from National Technical University, and then got his PhD from Columbia University. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Sotras.
So I was asked to give an introduction to the work we are doing at UCR on big data research. We have actually a very large group of faculty that works in this area. We have a very strong group. Professor Eldawi, Christidis, Kioch, Najjar, Papalexakis, Shelton, and myself. And I know there are more faculty in my department and elsewhere that work, so I will try to cover some of their research. So looking at these pictures, I thought to myself, you know, in order to become a member of this selective group, you must like the color blue, because I see that all the pictures, and this was not political. And of course, you must like working with data. We all live in a world where big data is everywhere. And, you know, your Twitter or, you know, messages and everything creates lots of data. But actually, what will happen in the near future is that we will have even more big data because of Internet of Things. This is going to be even more. So I thought about, whenever I give a talk on big data, people ask, what is big data? So I thought to say, so just how big is big data? And at least for myself, and you know, this question has many answers, but for myself, big data is not something that you can fit in one computer. So that's not big data. And you know, computers now have a lot of main memory, a lot of disk, but this is not big data. And it's also not big data even if you have many computers, but you can fit all of your data in the main memory of those computers. That's still not big enough. So what we consider big data is something that you really need many computers and lots of disk space, because the data is terabytes and more, right? So you cannot fit it in one. So when we start working in this problem, we saw that people working with big data technologies, actually in order to solve the problems, they use different technologies. Everyone probably has heard about MapReduce and Hadoop, right? So this is a very easy way that you can, you know, use parallel technologies to work with your data. But sometimes it's not what you need. You need data that's stored there, but you want to use some other technology like column stores, like Cassandra and so on. Or you want to be able to query this data with efficient ways and easy languages like Hive. So what you want to do is you try to connect different technologies with tape and chewing gum and try to find a solution. So when we thought about that, we thought that maybe there is a better solution, and we started a project funded by NSF with various grants called AsterixDB. This is in collaboration, actually, with my colleagues at UC Irvine. And we thought, can we use parallel technology and, research from Hadoop and this kind of technologies, but also, can we also store data that's not only, columns and relational, but maybe semi-structured data? And that led to a system that we built. It's called AsterixDB, that actually can try to solve all of these problems that you would have if you try to use different technologies in one place. So we take your data, we store it, we index it, and therefore it's very fast. And you can query this data. And for example, if you use MapReduce, you have to go through all of your data to do some queries. Here, because you have indexed the data, you can do queries that access only the part of the data that you want, so it's much faster. The current status of this project is actually up and running. It's an open source, it's an Apache project. It has about 250,000 lines of code, so it's really a real system. It's currently used by various universities for educational purposes, and it's actually been evaluated by industry, by a company called Couchbase, as being their main way to store and process data. So after this project, we help a lot of our students to get involved with big data. I thought, what will be next? So the next thing that we thought is, okay, you have big data. Can you make it active? And what do I mean by that? Imagine scenarios where you have collected a lot of information that you have stored, and it's very useful information, but also there is data that's coming in to you as streams. So consider some query that says, let me know if there is an emergency near where I am now, right? And if something like this happens, tell me what I can do. So tell me, where I can go and find shelter. This is a very complex query because it involves information that you have already stored, which is information about shelters, but also involves information that is live, coming to you as time goes on. There is a new emergency in the next block, right? So this is a very difficult problem. So that's what we call active data. Your data becomes active. It can give you notifications. And we want this to scale, right? So you want to be able to do very complex queries and send the notifications to millions of people. It's about, data that can be in the terabytes and so on. So we thought, okay, yeah, that's a good title, Big Active Data. So then we said, okay, what is that? So we changed the title and we said, okay, let's call it Building a Bad System. But it didn't sound very well, so one of my students said, what if we change it and call it Breaking Bad? Right, so that's, we have actually a slide out there about this idea that I explained. So it's an ongoing project, and again, in collaboration with colleagues from UC Irvine and also from UC Riverside. So what I will do next is I will try to discuss a little bit about the research of my colleagues. And first one is we have a new faculty here, Professor Elawi. He joined us this year, and he's working on big spatial data management. The idea is you have data that's also spatial. Okay, can you store it efficiently? Can you ask questions efficiently? Can you visualize it efficiently? He built a system called Spatial Hadoop, which actually has been used by downloaded like 20,000 times or maybe more. I don't remember the number. It's a very popular system. So this shows you actually the expertise that we have in-house. One of my other colleagues, Professor Christidis, is doing work with social data and health analytics. So people talk on Twitter about many things, so you can collect this information, you can find out what people are talking about, right? Are they talking about Obamacare and where, right? You can ask very interesting queries that involve health and social data. Another colleague of mine, who is also a new faculty, Professor Papalexakis, is working in how to make some of these data mining techniques much faster. So consider, you can see on the very far, who is talking to whom, and this is actually quite popular these days. Who called whom, all right? Who talked with Putin, for example, right? You may want to collect this data and find out who is friends with whom, right? Now, it's not only if I call you, it may be because I exchange emails, maybe because, we are friends on Facebook and so on, right? So there are many different aspects of this. Now, the more aspects you add, the more difficult the problem becomes because more dimensions in your tables, right? So now the problem is if I want to find interesting groups of people connected through all these different aspects, the problem becomes very tractable very quickly, right? So what Vangelis did is he used techniques from signal processing like tensor decomposition to break this problem into smaller problems that are tractable. And in that way, by doing it faster, you can actually find more interesting things easier. One of my other colleagues, Professor Shelton, who is an expert in AI and machine learning, he actually worked with doctors in ICU where they have small children, typically under anesthesia, and he looked at a very interesting problem. How can I find the pressure, for example, of CO2 in the blood? Not by actually getting blood from these kids, they are under so much stress, getting blood every so often, right? It's even more. But can I measure other things that help me to identify that, what is the pressure of CO2 in the blood? So he was able to use historical data and do predictive modeling to identify this, and this was actually helpful. Another colleague of mine, Professor Najjar, does work with accelerators, how to do your processing even faster, hardware accelerators. We do a project together that I'm actually very excited about. We actually using FPGAs to build super fast database machines. Now, the idea there is that you use multi-threading, which is not a new idea for hardware, right? It has been used in the past for CPUs, but with FPGAs, you can do multi-threading in much larger scale, which eventually, at the end, you can do database processing like 2 or 3 orders of magnitude faster than traditional, even the best CPUs that we have now. This is new ideas and we are almost done into building the full system. One other of my colleagues, Professor Kio, who is an expert in time series and data mining, he's using his expertise in another field, in entomology. So he's able to find interesting solutions to entomology problems. And actually, his research, I don't know if you see recently a TV ad by Microsoft. You cannot see it very well on this poster, but in that ad, one of the people there is one of his students. They are using the stuff that he did recently in his lab. I would like to finish my talk discussing about the new Data Science Center, which we have recently created with support of Mike Bazzani and actually 2 of my colleagues, Bahram Bobasser from astronomy and Thomas Gierke from genomics. And the mission of that center is to inspire, enable, and support cross-disciplinary research in data science. We have various activities that, there is a data science seminar. If you are interested, send me an email, I can add you in the list. We try to have to connect the communities between, let's say, data science, like computer science, statistics, electrical engineering, and the applications, which can be different sciences. And there are many people here doing a lot of work with data, so we try to connect these two communities. We actually plan a new undergraduate program for data science together with the statistics department. It's still under planning, but it's going to happen. And there is already an online master's program, and we try to do collaborative proposals together. So that's all.
You can find out a lot more detail across the aisle when we're done with our panel session. Okay, our next speaker and penultimate speaker is Dr. Julia Bailey-Serres, who's a professor of genetics and the director of the Center for Plant Cell Biology in the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences at UCR. She's been a faculty member at UCR since 1990, but I wanted to also mention she's also a recent inductee to the National Academy of Sciences. And for those that don't know this, any sports fans here? It's like the Hall of Fame for baseball, football, etc., but in science. So she's the, I won't use the word. Okay, she's the crap. All right, but she's good. All right, and her research involves studying sensing, signaling, acclimation responses to low oxygen stress in plants. Her multidisciplinary approach combines genetics, molecular, biochemical, bioinformatic technologies. So she's really, truly multidisciplinary and has significant implications for agricultural and our global food challenges. She has a bachelor from University of Utah and a PhD from Edinburgh. I'm not going to delay anymore and let her come up and speak, so please.
Okay, so I've passed the first challenge, and now I want to talk to you about the challenges that are the focus of the research in my group. Before I do, I want to just re-mention that there is a Center for Plant Cell Biology here at UCR. This is a group of researchers who work on plants, but also individuals coming from chemical and environmental engineering, computer science, chemistry, and other departments who work together on these really tremendously grand challenges, which range from the type of work that I do relating to improving crops, and also to understanding really how plants work. So the work that we're doing is intending to increase the ability of plants to endure differences in their climate. And when things get hot for us or cold, we move away, we wrap up, but plants are really situated in one place because of their root system. And as our climate changes because of CO2 production, because of higher levels of greenhouse gases, there are more floods and droughts. We all know about this. We often talk about it as climate change. There's even discussion about whether or not there is climate change. But the bottom line is that the predictions for weather on this earth will be an increased number of floods and droughts over the next years of this century. And this image that's shown here shows in sort of a golden color regions where there's going to be increased droughts, and in a blue color regions where there will be more floods. And these are based on numerous climate prediction models. And as you can see from this image, that these are more or less, changes will be throughout the continents of the world where crops are grown. A consequence of this is that extreme weather events are going to impact the production of crops. And over time, we must then increase the amount of yield in the context of these climate change events. And so as population grows beyond the 7.5 billion that was already mentioned today to perhaps over 9.5 billion by mid-century, there has to be a dramatic increase over time in the amount of the major grains that are produced. This image shows you that there is something we call the need gap. So based on the increase in crop production over time, this anticipated amount that will be produced with crop improvements does not meet what is actually needed by humanity. And then if we then factor in the consequence of climate change and the impact on productivity, there's even a greater gap because of weather. And so our challenge as plant biologists is to work to improve crop yields despite these climate change challenges. And the way in which we can do this is by using traditional breeding or by using more modern technologies, which I'll just call here genome modification. So breeding takes advantage of, oftentimes, the diversity of genes that exist within a crop. And I work on rice. There's actually thousands and thousands of types of rice, and these different rice varieties come from various parts of the world, and oftentimes there are genes that are gems in old varieties, maybe what you might consider an heirloom variety, that are no longer present in the rice that's grown for production, but are there and are genes that can provide a solution for us. There's often also genes that are gems in wild species, and these can be found and harnessed through breeding or through these genome modification technologies that I mentioned. I have been working with a team for a number of years to solve the problem of deep floods in rice fields. And these submergence events for rice that's generally produced are devastating when the plants are underwater for more than 7 days. But we've been able to take advantage of the natural genetic diversity of rice to identify particularly one gene that's called SUB1, and it's really less than 1/1,000,000th of the entire DNA of the rice plant that has been found that will enable the plant to endure a prolonged submergence event and survive for 14 days or longer. The way that this was accomplished was by breeding, by identifying regions of the DNA that enabled the plants to survive. And in my group, what we did is we figured out really how this works, and that's what that little box is up there. And so not only have we been able to breed, but we've been able to understand and produce new rice varieties that are submergence tolerant. Perhaps the best way for me to show you this is to show you a video that was produced by the International Rice Research Institute that compares two varieties that are near identical, differing only in the gene that provides submergence tolerance. Those are the plants on the left of the screen. And you saw they were underwater, in this case for 14 days. And here they are regrowing. The rice that's the SUB1 rice is productive. More of it is recovered from this prolonged submergence event. And the other variety is a variety that's grown most widely in the US, in the world for rice productivity, does not as well and produces in this particular experiment about half the amount of yield. Today, more than 10 million farmers in Asia have SUB1 rice, and they're using it in their fields that often endure submergence events just because of an intense cyclone, for example. The work in my lab is not just on flooding and submergence, but it's also focused on improving the ability of plants to endure a drought. And we consider this, this challenge really a challenge of understanding plant plasticity and how we can make a crop that does well under a variety of conditions. And the work that we do involves deciphering the genes that are regulated over time and space in the plant. And this is a video from an experiment that was done this summer with a team of undergraduates and 2 postdocs in my group, where they developed strategies to look very deeply at changes in gene regulation, and then to test how, use these lines to test how this dynamic determines how the plant survives and recovers from either a drought or a flood. And you can see from this video that we're working in the greenhouse and ultimately taking these technologies to the field. And it's really quite a tremendous project that's being driven by both undergraduates and graduate students and postdocs here at UCR. And the next speaker will talk to you about that team of graduates that's very important in this work. So in closing, the work that I've just mentioned is work focused on improving agriculture under situations where there's too much or too little water. These are really grand challenges that are of utmost importance for us to have sufficient food to feed the world. And from the talks that you've heard already today, you've noted that many people have talked about working together, working interdisciplinarily. The work that I've done also fits under this this umbrella, and I'd like to say that we're very fortunate here at UCR that we are not too big and the boundaries between departments are not so great, that we do work together on these grand challenges, and in this particular case, on the challenge of global food security. So thank you.
That was lovely. Thank you, Julia. So our final speaker tonight is a firecracker. Dr. Susan Wessler is the Neil A. and Rochelle A. Campbell Presidential Chair for Innovations in Science Education and Distinguished Professor of Genetics at UCR. She's a Howard Hughes Medical Institute professor, and like Dr. Bailey Saras, is also a member of the Hall of Fame, the National Academy of Science. She's also the Home Secretary of the National Academy of Sciences. So her areas of expertise include genome evolution, genetics, transposable elements, bioinformatics, and scientific teaching. She's an East Coaster too, so I like her even more. So.
Thank you, David. Okay, now for something completely different, if I can find this. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see anything. So everything looks the same here. Does it? So what I'm going to talk about is not my research, but what I've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years, which is translating cutting-edge research into projects for undergraduates, for freshmen, actually. Okay. So to begin, this is a Living the Promise symposium. And so I thought that I would tell you a little bit about what that means to me, because it's relevant to this talk. So my goal, my vision, is to provide quality STEM experiences for our students, for many of you, so that our students will be competitive with the very best colleges, college graduates from Stanford, UCLA, and Berkeley, et cetera. So why is this important? Why do I care about this? First of all, like most of our students, I am a first-generation student. Neither one of my parents went to college. And I realize the importance of really a quality education. The other thing that I share with many of the students here is that I've spent my entire life at public universities. So I went, as an undergraduate, I went to Stony Brook, SUNY Stony Brook. I went to Cornell for my PhD, and Cornell, for many of you, is half public and half private, and I went to the public part, the ag part of the campus. Then I've been a professor only at public universities also. I spent 28 years at the University of Georgia, and I've been here for the last 6 years. So public education is really, really important to me. But the problem is that we have a real crisis in public education, as I think most of you know. Really, for us to succeed as a country, we have to be able to educate people, educate more people, and provide a quality education for more people. And the reason this is critical is, as a geneticist, I know that intelligence is really equally divided across all the races, all human races. Humans evolved 40,000 years ago from basically a common ancestor. That's not a long time ago. And what that means is that we're all basically pretty much the same with some variation. And if we're only providing a quality education to the wealthiest in this country, then we're going to lose. Because what that means is that the talents in this country are not being developed. And the reason that's in danger now is because there have been huge cuts in money to public universities, to public education, and it's a real tragedy. And so there's not a lot that I can do as an individual, but I wanted to do something. So what I did when I came here 6 years ago was part of the reason I came here is UCR provided me with the opportunity to grow a program that I had started at the University of Georgia. It's called the Dynamic Genome Course, and it's taught I don't know if many of you have seen it, it's on the other side of campus. It's near genomics in the University Lab Building, and the building is the Neil A. Campbell Science Learning Center. Okay, and it's like we're talking about emerging technologies, this is really cutting-edge STEM education. So here's, for those of you who are not here, and this is a pretty lousy picture, this is the entrance. Neil A. Campbell, for those of you, any of you biology majors, or have you taken intro biology? Want to raise your hand? All right, so the book that you've used is probably Campbell Biology. Neil Campbell got his PhD at UC Riverside. He came back later in his life as a visiting professor, and unfortunately he died as a very young person at 56. His widow, Rochelle Campbell, is sitting here in the front row, and we met when I came here, and she she donated a significant amount of money to allow Riverside and myself to renovate the entire floor of this building. And this is sort of the honor wall at the front. The facility is very unusual. The purpose of it is to provide cutting-edge experiences to incoming freshmen, okay? So our labs look very much like research labs. The equipment that's there is equipment that is used if you go to the upstairs lab, basically the sorts of labs as Julia was talking about in genomics or all over the campus. So on the first floor, and the other thing that we bring together in this facility is students do what is done in most cutting-edge labs. That is, they work at the bench, and that you see on the left side here, and they also do computational analysis. So both of those are introduced and then taught to students in this exciting environment. We've had famous visitors. We've had Janet Napolitano. We hosted her a couple of years ago. So in terms of the impact, the program is growing. It started out fairly small with only 12 sections. So this is a freshman course. It's an alternative to Intro Biology Lab first quarter, Bio 20. And it's, Bio 5. And so we've gone from 12 sections and approximately 280 students up to this year, we're up to 18 sections and almost 500 students. What we're hoping to do is double this over the next couple years so that all of incoming CNAS students can have this kind of experience. The way we've been able to do this is really to what I call bridge the upstairs and downstairs. I call the upstairs our research labs, where the most cutting edge science, a lot of what you've heard so far is going on. The downstairs are our classrooms. Not so good, right? Classrooms and laboratories. So the problem, though, is that there really is limited resources to renovate, to fix up a lot of the structures. So one of the solutions that we've come upon is UCR faculty, or research faculty, Julia has done this, and several other faculty members, they take ownership of a section. What that means is they come to the classroom, and for half of the 10 weeks, they introduce the students to an authentic research project, and the entire class does a project. So with our, this year, 18 sections, we're having approximately 6 different faculty that have taken ownership of a section, and basically they bring the excitement of their research lab into the classroom. So what that also means is that our students, our freshmen, when they finish, are essentially research ready. So what they can do is, this is sort of a pass. They can go upstairs and perform independent research in the laboratories of our cutting edge faculty. So essentially that is the way we can provide experiences for our undergraduates that are equivalent, if not better, than what many students in STEM are getting from places like Stanford and Caltech. And like I said, you need those experiences to succeed in this world. So what you're going to see in the posters is several of the students that have gone through this course. Will be presenting posters. Several of them have worked in Julie Bailey Sayers' lab. As I said, they finish as freshmen. She comes in and does some teaching in the course. She sees students that really enjoy working with rice, and then they're invited upstairs to her research lab. The last thing is I just want to thank again Rochelle Campbell, who recently, this is an incredible person, donated a significant amount of money to endow a chair, and I'm the first person to actually sit in that chair. And I think the point being is that with money that is being cut from the federal government to education, the federal government, the state government, we really rely more and more on private funding to support the kind of programs that I just described. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite all of our speakers up on stage so we can have a discussion. And while we're waiting, I just want to encourage the audience to try and interact with our panelists. And as soon as we're done with the panel discussion again, I'd I'd like to invite everyone to find out more details about what we're doing, not just what the panelists are doing, but other faculty that have brought their students here and have posters next door. There's also some fruit and snacks if you're low on blood sugar. With that said, I want to just let the panel have their own time to give their opinions, and I want to play off of what Sue's last comment was the impact of donors and what that really means in light of shrinking funding from the government. And you guys have some microphones there, so I'm going to leave it up to the panel. I'm going to step away. Don't be shy.
Well, I guess I'll start. I mean, I think that we are all passionate about different things, and I hope that, everyone here realizes how infectious the passion we have here for research and education is, also recognizes the tremendous diversity that we have on our campus, and sees this as an opportunity to make an impact that really will be long-lasting.
I guess maybe it's a good chance to thank the Ford Motor Company, who funds my chair at CSERT in environmental engineering. And so that's been a really good key to a lot of our research in terms of giving us flexibility to do a lot of projects and support students' activities that otherwise we would not be able to do. So that's really important as well.
If I can add something to Sue's comment about the educating undergraduates and enabling them to be head and shoulders, if you will, above students, let's say, from Stanford. I have to say that the hands-on experience is critical, and so I'm glad to see there are some undergraduates in here. And so one thing I'd also like to, if you wouldn't mind commenting on, I'm sure each of you have had undergrads in your lab, to maybe comment about how your research impacts them and how that can be translated into our community and nation and world. While the shy people are deciding on who will speak first, I want to encourage audience members, if you have questions, we do have some microphones, so raise your hand, and before you ask your question, wait until the microphone gets to you, please.
Well, I guess I won't be shy. I have to say that my career as a plant biologist began as an undergraduate researcher, and that's part of the reason why I've always found it very easy to have undergraduates in my group. I think it's something that's very important for this undergraduate student and also for the mentors in the lab. We have here at UCR several programs in the summer that bring students from other schools, oftentimes from two-year colleges or other places where there's not research opportunities. And in this way, we also can attract these students possibly to graduate programs here. I think it's just a fantastic opportunity that we have to have the students from our classes working in our lab.
Yeah, I'd like to comment about the undergraduates in the sense that not everyone that leaves UCR is going to graduate school. But those students, we have a lot of requests often, but we're limited in funds actually as to how many undergraduates we can take. And the main thing I would say is that the undergraduates that do come, if they go to graduate school, they've had some experience with doing graduate research because they're working with a graduate student usually. But maybe equally important is that those students who are going into the workforce afterwards find that it's rather challenging to get positions, and having on your resume that you've actually been doing work in a lab and meeting timelines and showing up and things like that becomes rather valuable in your search for a job.
So I think building a little bit on what Wayne was saying and also what Susan was saying, two things about the undergraduate research. For me, I think it took me actually a long time to get to academia because I personally didn't see people like me in these kinds of positions, in research positions as faculty, and I didn't have my own undergraduate experience doing research. So it took a while for me to learn that this is actually something I can do, and it's great to get undergraduate students started earlier than I got started. And the other thing, speaking to what Wayne said, but not everyone will go on to go and do research, but I think it's critical that we just build a more scientifically literate population. And when you know what it takes to get the data and where the data come from and the analysis and all these things, I think you're more able to analyze and interpret and sort of be more thoughtful about what you're seeing in the newspapers and things like that.
I just want to share an experience I had, because you said how this comes back to us. So when, let's say, I teach the undergraduate database class, I try to give whatever information I can to the students without actually thinking too much about the effect it may have on them. But sometimes, every so often, you get this email from a student that, you had many years ago, and they come back and say, "Oh, Professor, thank you for teaching me this particular thing, because in my company, I was actually the only one that I knew about it." And then, just this thing make me feel nice about what we are doing here, and actually, I think we're doing an excellent job, and also try even harder, because, we have kids that may not be as lucky as other kids. I know people that I didn't know, and they were, coming from a very difficult family background, and now this guy is in research and produces excellent results, and, that's what UCR is about. Okay, so.
So do you have a comment?
Well, I was going to say one of the reasons we offered the course to freshmen is that there's a major problem nationwide in students dropping out of STEM. So out of all the students that start in STEM, close to 60% drop out by their second year. When I say drop out, it's to go into a different major, a non-STEM major. And the problem with that is that there are so many jobs in STEM. But first of all, the reason people drop out many times is that the way we introduce you to science is generally, a lecture hall with 800 of your closest friends. And that's not science. I mean, science, it's like, in a sense, reading about baseball by saying somebody hits a ball, they go to first base, they go to second. What we love about science is not reading facts, but it's doing the experiments. It's making discoveries. And so one of the reasons, like I said, the main reason that I wanted to offer this, and more places across the country, we've gotten rid of a lot of labs for entering students because they're expensive. And again, that's a huge loss. And what we're seeing is that, that it's really worth it to spend the money for students when they come in, to introduce them to science and to get them to love science so that they stay in. Because I think the jobs are incredible. There's jobs in industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, in diagnostics, and all these areas, and the jobs here in California. And so, it's an opportunity that, we as professors needed to learn that we were screwing up in terms of not sort of teaching, not showing students the passion that we have for science. And so I think that's one of the main reasons why more and more universities are going back to what used to be done, and that is introducing students early on to experimental research.
And it doesn't come cheap either. So, and a lot of the funding agencies don't necessarily fund this type of engagement with undergraduates to enable them to this. So, as Sue had mentioned, donors are critical in this case. Mike, I think you had a question.
Yes, I do have a question. So, is this on?
Should be a green light there.
See it.
Is it on?
I guess it is. It's actually intermittent, unfortunately. So for the faculty here, I mean, you're all very smart. Those were great presentations. Why did you decide to become a professor? You could have done a number of other things. What is it about teaching and research that drove you to make a professor your profession?
Well, like I said, I mean, I had a late start, so I kept realizing sort of step by step that what the education that I had wasn't allowing me to do the jobs that I wanted to do. So I actually started out as a biology major, and because I really like fish. And then I realized that with an undergraduate degree in biology, I could count fish. And I was thinking that's just not that interesting to count fish. I really like fish, but I don't want to just count fish. So I decided that, and I love teaching. Both my parents are actually teachers. So I started teaching, and I decided that teaching elementary school students is really hard, and it's just really hard. And the students don't like you, and the parents don't like you, and the administrators don't like you. So I went back to school, and the real story is that my PhD advisor wanted to learn how to snowboard. So we made a deal. And I taught him how to snowboard, and I started doing research in his lab. And I love it. And I love the challenge. I love the uncertainty. I love that now we have the ability to deliver solutions to these pressing problems. I love that every single day my job is different. And I love working with students. I really do. And so I always thought, how do people do this? How do they teach and do research? But I just kept telling myself, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And I'm super happy to be here.
Can I ask if anyone answers that question to also answer why UCR? So why faculty, but why UCR? Because you're all excellent.
So, first of all, why I became a professor. I was also, I was the first one in my family to go to university, and then I came to a different country. I did my graduate studies in New York, and when I graduated, my work was a little bit more theoretical. I didn't feel that that good in actual programming and stuff. So the faculty position was safer. So it was a little bit by luck also. But my first faculty was in New York, Polytechnic University is called. And then now I started teaching, and then I realized that's actually something fun. Especially explaining to kids things that try to understand. And now why UCR? It was also by luck. It was for personal reasons. My wife came to decide, so I was on sabbatical at UCLA, and then I came to see the place, and I liked it, and that's how it happened.
I want to ask Charlie to answer, if you don't mind, because Charles Wyman actually has a lot of industrial experience as well. So he's not coming through the proper channels. He kind of snuck his way into academia. So I'm just kidding, Charlie. Come here.
Probably a fair comment. No, actually, I got my PhD because I wanted to be a professor. That was my whole goal when I got a PhD in the first place. But I got diverted from being able to do a simple route by something called the Vietnam War. And so that ended up with an Army obligation and some other things that then diverted me into industry for various reasons because of, it take forever for me to tell all these stories. But, and then I went to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and it was the Solar Energy Research Institute when I joined it. And I originally went there because I really wanted to work in the area of sustainable energy and renewable energy. So after I got done with the Army obligations and some other things, I joined NREL, and basically to get experience in renewable energy so they could then transition back to university and really do research and teaching in that area. So it's much more complicated than that, but that's good enough for now. But I think overall, in terms of what attracted me to UCR, I felt there's a number of things. I think one is the Chemical and Environmental Engineering Department and CSERT have a wide range of activities in energy, environment, things that I really feel are important. I probably did like a 6th grade project on sustainable energy when I was much younger. And so I've always had a strong desire to work in that area, but I also felt California was a great place to do these kind of things because California tends to be on the leading edge of almost anything. And so I thought that was important. And then also the opportunity to really, I find working with students, teaching students, trying to, and that's where I think my industrial experience is valuable because hopefully I can provide I have several of my victims here up from mass transfer class I teach, who hopefully I can give them some sense of why some of this seemingly very esoteric stuff is important in the real world. So that's always a challenge though because they haven't really seen how to use it yet and they're trying to learn principles that it may not be entirely clear why they're important.
Are there additional questions? Don't be shy. There's one right here.
Hello. Thank you, professors. You did an amazing job. It was just extremely interesting to see all of the presentations today. I hear you guys talking about the different jobs that are out there in the marketplace for some of the graduates from your programs. What I'm more on the entrepreneurial side, and Jay Gilberg and Mark Leibowitz asked me to come here today because they're working on that entrepreneurship program. How do you guys see developing entrepreneurs within these particular programs? Because, as you know, in our capitalist system, you need to have some hitters, right? Like Elon Musk is the largest cliche that you can put out there, but the type of momentum that he's built with his capitalist approach, so to speak, of alternative energy cars is building such large momentum that it makes people think that there is an alternative future, right? So all of these ideas, which are absolutely mind-blowing to me, and you guys are way smarter than I am, how do you get those students who have that entrepreneurial bug, that have that drive, how do you get them to get to that place where they become those hitters and they are out there in the marketplace shaking things up to actually make people feel that they are living a promise? There is an alternative future to what we're currently living in.
Well, I would say that you have to even go back one step. I mean, this is academia, okay? So academia, there's not a whole lot of contact, especially in the biological sciences, with the real world. I mean, quite honestly, all of us very few of us have been in companies, have worked for companies. So one of the things that we've done in our program is we have a collaboration with the Keck Graduate Institute, KGI, which is one of the Claremont colleges. My husband happens to be president there. And so they prepare students for the life science industry in bioprocessing and pharmaceuticals and all of that. So we have a collaborative program, summer program, where students, and I think there'll be a few posters in there, where students have a business project. They learn about intellectual property. They learn about where you get capital. They learn about how you turn a discovery into a product. And so that's what they're learning in the context of this. So like I said, I would say for most of the science here, there needs to be more of a focus on industry because we're all basically products of academia except a few of us, right?
I know in the College of Engineering, one of my colleagues, Professor Faluchos, he's actually the director of entrepreneurship now. It's a very interesting case. While he was a professor, he started a company, a startup, which eventually was bought up by some other company. So what he's doing now, we have a special class where he offers his experience about what he went through, because he was like me, right? He didn't have any experience. So students can take this class and get the first exposure of what it means to create your company. And you may have a great idea, but how you can make it, make other people believe in that and sell it and so on, right? So I know there is one course, there may be even more coming up, but that's how we try to get to that.
I just want to add to that. Here at UCR, it's been mentioned the EPIC program, this entrepreneurial that was initiated by the Vice Chancellor Pisani's office. So this is a really new program that's really integrating with undergraduates and graduates. And if I can have a show of hands, how many undergrads or grads have participated in the fall quarter? I know there was a group there. So I know Nick, Jesus have been there. So this is a program where students that are interested in working with faculty that are patenting have the opportunity to actually engage with industries and start to learn about how startup companies work. So there's that other avenue if they don't want to go down the academic route or industrial route and they want to start their own companies. This exists here at UCR, and that's quite powerful. I don't know if you want to say anything else about that, Mike, but it is about time we wrap up. All right. Well, let's first of all thank all of our speakers and panelists.
Yeah, so I'd just like to take time to thank our speakers again. Thank you very much. But also, there's posters and food across there, so let's go there, have a conversation, and you can mingle with the speakers there. Thank you very much.